Hi, my name is Tae Hea Nahm, and I'm excited to share with you a personal experience that I had, which really helped me succeed in the US business world as a Korean American. And it came down to just basically three words, just unlearn Confucius. So, a quick background about myself first. I'm now a venture capitalist. I'm a co-founder of Storm Ventures, been here for 20 years, and we focus on building enterprise leaders. At Storm, I was founding CEO of a company, Aerospace, for a couple of years, which we sold to Cisco for 450 million. We've invested in 7 unicorns and been fortunate to write two books on how to build enterprise startups called Survival to Thrival. Um, my Korean American journey really began when I was 5 years old. This is a photo of myself and my mother as we were boarding a plane to fly from Korea, immigrate from Korea to the United States. And I was grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, as in a very Confucian value system. And all these Confucian values help, but I found that to succeed in business here in America, it was important to unlearn Confucius. And it's not to say that Confucian values are bad. In fact, they're fantastic. There are all these articles about how Confucian values accelerated the growth of East Asian companies. Here are a couple of quotes here. One from Josh Park, who wrote, after researching the development of South Korea in the 1950s and the influence of Confucianism on Koreans, I believe Confucianism played a heavy role in the successful economic and industrial growth of South Korea. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal which talked about how Asia's rise is rooted in Confucian values. In fact, Confucian values really, I would say, accelerated my academic success. I did well academically. I went to Harvard. I was magna cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa, went to University of Chicago Law School. Confucian values really, emphasized our family. And so we have a close family. I would say it's the core of who I am. But I had a rude shock when I was leaving school. I thought I've got this great resume, I'm doing well, but all of a sudden I was getting over 95% rejection in job offers and wondering what's happening. And the feedback that I got from interviewers were, nice guy, but we don't think you can survive or succeed in our firm. And I'm trying to figure out, well, what happened here? And it turns out that in a lot of sense, the way I was grown up about Confucian values, about harmony, about filial piety, and so forth, sort of held me back when I was interviewing for jobs and when I was starting off my career. So I happened to come across this article last year, which really summarized a lot of my thoughts that I want to share with you. The article is by Professor Jackson Liu from MIT and is published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences and is called Why East Asians, but not South Asians, are Underrepresented in Leadership Positions in the United States. So the first leadership position that he looks into is S&P 500 CEOs in the United States as sort of just a way of measuring business leadership. And as you can see on the left-hand side, there are South Asian CEOs of Adobe, Google, IBM, MasterCard, Microsoft, Pepsi. In fact, back in 2010, if you compare South Asian CEOs to East Asian CEOs, though the ratio is about 2.7 to 1, but now it's expanded where there are more than 4 times as many South Asian CEOs as East Asian CEOs. And if you look as a percentage of the population, there are actually more South Asian CEOs amongst their community, as you can see, 3 per million, than there are actually white CEOs of 2 per million. And East Asian CEOs, as you can see, is at the bottom of the pack there, even less than 1 per million. He went on to sort of expand his study and found that there's the same result for other leadership positions, not just S&P 500 CEOs, but other leadership positions in large US companies. And he also looked at leadership amongst 4 consecutive MBA classes and saw basically the same result. So he asked them the question, why? And so he went through several factors. The first he looked at was like demographics. And the answer is no. He was able to control in his studies for potential demographic factors such as birth country, English fluency, education level, socioeconomic status, and GDP per country of capital origin. The second thing he looked at was prejudice, and he couldn't find any difference between South Asians and East Asians there. In fact, a recent Asian American survey suggests South Asians may experience greater prejudice than East Asians in everyday life, possibly because South Asians have darker skin tone, and it says here physical resemblance to certain Middle Easterners. He looked at a couple of others, such as motivation, aptitude, didn't find any difference. So the factor that he found that is different comes down to assertiveness. When I first read this, I was wondering, what do you mean by assertiveness? In fact, how can you even measure assertiveness in a study? So the way that he measured assertiveness is by asking these questions. And so starting at the bottom, which is least assertive, is I speak up and share my views when it is appropriate, to more assertive, which is I'm willing to engage in constructive interpersonal confrontations. So you go from when appropriate to confrontations. And then lastly is to I'm able to stand my ground in a heated conflict. In fact, some people enjoy heated conflicts. And so this is sort of how he measured assertiveness. And what you see is amongst East Asians, many East Asians sort of view assertiveness as a threat to group stability. And he goes on to say that, you know, East Asians are strongly influenced by Confucius, which emphasizes humility, conformity, harmony, rather than assertiveness in personal communications. And he gave a couple of sayings as well, that the nail that sticks out gets hammered down, the loudest doubt gets shot. In contrast, when he looked at South Asians, he says that, South Asian culture encourages assertiveness in interpersonal communications. He, as an example, pointed out Nobel laureates, Professor Sen's book on the argumentative Indian, where there's a long tradition of argumentation and debate in India. So how does that then connect to American leadership? And that is the reason why assertiveness is so important is that, and here again, this is also from Professor Jackson's article, is that in the United States, the prototypical leader is high in communication assertiveness, which is defined as the tendency to stand up and speak out for one's interests and concerns when appropriate. American leaders are expected to be assertive because actively asserting one's opinion signals confidence, motivation, and conviction. And so if we just look at our last two presidents, whether it's Donald Trump or Barack Obama, whether you like them, whether you agree with them, disagree with them, in either sense, they're viewed as sort of American leaders, very assertive in their own ways and very good in terms of communication. So at the end, Professor Liu concludes with, in summary, the current research has revealed that East Asians, but not South Asians, hit the bamboo ceiling partly because East Asians communicate less assertively. Goes on to say the bamboo ceiling is not an Asian issue, but an issue of cultural fit, a mismatch between East Asian norms of communication and American norms of leadership. Then we can go on to other examples of how different ethnic communities are doing. This was an article that I saw from The Economist, which compares different ethnic groups in the United States. And I was shocked to see here that, Indian Americans are on a per capita basis, doing twice as well economically as South Koreans. I mean, it does show in this case that they have a higher percentage with postgraduate education, but still it's twice as high as South Koreans. And I see that in our investments as well. We've invested in a couple of hundred B2B software companies, and we find that Israelis and Indians excel as CEOs better than other type of CEOs, in particular East Asians. And that's because they have the ability to sell vision. This is selling vision to customers so you can close revenue, to selling vision to employees so you can hire great people or retain great people, sell vision to investors to raise money, or to sell vision to go-to-market partners that can sort of help build your ecosystem. So, going back to my interview days, when I realized that assertiveness is very important, I then was wondering, how can I become assertive while maintaining my Confucian values? I mean, you have, in a sense, Confucius and the role model of Confucius on one side, and prototypical American leaders, whether it's Obama, Trump, or others, who are very assertive. So I look at sort of, what are Confucian values, because that is the core of who I am. And Confucian values, as Professor Bloom talks about, comes down to three pillars. One is filial piety, which is respect for parents. In the business context, is respect for hierarchy. Humaneness, which is care or concern for other human beings, which is about being harmonious, having a harmony at the office. And the third, ritual, which is a proper way of doing things, you can say is conformity or following sort of standard workflow. At the end of the day, I look at all this and say that Confucian values really encourages stability. At the same time, American leadership requires assertiveness, like we talked about, the Trumps, the Obamas, and so forth. But for me, I found, just being assertive to just be assertive is very difficult. And so I felt like there was this conflict between how to be assertive and how to retain Confucian values. And so how do you sort of resolve this particular conflict? In my case, it came down to really thinking more in terms of myself, in terms of what am I passionate about and how can I be authentic about it? So it wasn't like, how can I be more assertive, but what do I really believe in? And as a result, want to express that. So in my case, what I was really passionate about was building successful startups. And when it comes to successful startups, it's all about disruptive change. A couple of classic entrepreneur examples are, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk. They're both obviously against the status quo, against stability. And I think it goes back to the American sort of old metaphor of the pioneer who's out to colonize the Wild West and so forth, which is very similar to that startup entrepreneur mentality. So when I look at startups, three things are really important. One is vision. And you look for these startup leaders like Steve Jobs, the charismatic visionary, the rebel, the counterculture person. I mean, it's all about disruption with that vision. The second is about a person that can lead a winning team. It's about pushing people to do the impossible, where they only tolerate A players. Steve Jobs talks about preventing the bozo explosion, where he warns that just promoting harmony in the workplace means you'll have mediocre companies in your workforce, and that he wants to just tolerate only A players. And the third is about creativity, which is about being open to new ideas, rejecting the status quo, looking for change. So I look at these sort of startup values and then compare it with Confucian values, which I mentioned encourage stability. So how do you have this sort of rebel visionary versus respect for hierarchy? How do you have this sort of winning, tolerate only Series A, only A players with harmony? Or how do you have creativity with following the proper way of doing things? It's about how do you reconcile disruptive change to stability. So one view is to just assume the two are opposites and they would not coexist. In fact, I read this interesting article in the South China Morning Post recently, which takes this sort of conflict to a much broader view and says, are Confucian China and Christian West designed to clash? Can religion explain the new Cold War? In other words, suggesting that Confucius and Christian values are, contradictory. Another way that I look at it is, if you can find the overlap between disruptive change, which is critical to a startup, and team stability, which is critical to Confucian values, you actually have a much stronger startup. And so I find that that is the ideal situation. And the way to do it again is to go back to what is passion, what is the whole company, people passionate about, which is the vision, the change, the disruption. But they could also be passionate about sort of maintaining team stability and having these Confucian values. So going back uh, to what I mentioned after my first year in law school, when I was leaving school, I got this feedback and this very objective measure, which is, 95% job rejection. So next year when I was interviewing, I changed my interviewing style by unlearning Confucius. In particular, I asked myself, what do I want to show about myself in this 1 hour interview? And whereas in the prior year, I really emphasized sort of the harmony where, I'm a nice guy, we can get along. And as a result, I came across as a very meek, mild mannered person to being much more assertive next year, which was being very clear on what I wanted to do, what I felt, how I felt working in the firm would be a win-win for them and myself. And so they can see how I was an aggressive person that could succeed in their tough job environment. And as a result, I got 95% job offers. And so to conclude, want to say that unlearning Confucius really helped me in business in the United States, while at the same time, retaining core Confucian values for who I am. And as a result, uh, saw a dramatic increase in job offers. So with that, I would just want to conclude and thank you for this opportunity for just sharing my personal experience with you, and open to any questions that people may have. Please, in particular, reach out, feel free to reach out to me over LinkedIn. Thank you very much.